right, we are here, everyone. My name is Erica Lukes. This is Expanding Frontiers, and I want you to know how much I appreciate you accommodating my time schedule. We're changing up the times on the shows a little bit, but you are always wonderful to be here live. I appreciate listeners from all over the world. We have such a respectful community that likes to talk about important subjects. So thank you for that. I want to give a shout out to my friend and colleague, Jack Brewer, who is my research partner. We have been releasing more blogs. You can go to expandingfrontiersresearch.org to check out our latest work and to help support the work that we do. I also want to thank Barry Greenwood for his assistance on the archiving end. So I am here with somebody that I think is an important voice to hear, somebody that really understands cult behavior and can give us tips for things to avoid. And I think this is really important, especially now with the internet, with the way technologies have changed. We have to be all the more aware of what's going on in our surroundings and when we interact with people online. Dr. Stephen Kent has been at the University of Alberta since 1986. He earned multiple degrees in religious studies and sociologies and received grants to study sex, cults, and new religions in Canada and the United States. As a result, Dr. Kent's award-winning research, he amassed one of North America's largest collections of alternative and sectarian religions. Dr. Kent has studied and taught on a wide variety of religious organizations, which we're going to talk about today, and practices including controversial sects, cults, and alternative religions, and the mental health issues related to sectarian leaders. Students under Dr. Kent's supervision have published a wide range of topics, including evangelical youth and sexuality, Jim Jones' use of language, sex and family violence, Scientology's business management practices, terrorism, pseudoscience, children of God, the family, Heaven's Gate, and among others. So I am really, Dr. Kent, thank you so much for taking a couple hours out of your afternoon to join me. I've been watching your interviews and reading your work, and I'm just amazed at everything that you've done. And I want to, for our listeners that aren't familiar with you, if you could tell us the beginning, how you first got into studying these topics.
I entered the University of Maryland, College Park, in 1969. In 1970, the campuses exploded. The reactions around the world, especially in the United States, were against America's invasion of Cambodia. We had National Guard, tear gas, riots, and so on. So political expression, anger, was just widespread. By the time I graduated in 1973, political protest had really died down. And oddly, it seemed in its place was a wave of gurus and swamis and enlightened masters and spiritual teachers and people who were involved in claiming access to higher religions. And a lot of my generation seemed to make that transition. And I went to a number of these spiritual groups and talks and so on, saw a number of the gurus who were coming through. After I graduated, I drifted around in various jobs for a while, including working for a number of months in you might say, a new age, or certainly a religious retreat center. And so gurus came through. I cooked for Baba Ram Dass, and I was a bad cook, let me tell you. And so I was just around this material. I went back to graduate. I went to graduate school, I guess, in 1975, at a program at American University in Washington, D.C. And I initially had signed up for an MA in English Study of the Bible, but I walked into the office one day, and there was information about a new program that was starting up in the history of religions, Hinduism. And I jumped at it. So I spent 2 years studying the history of religions, Hinduism, with a minor in Gnosticism. Went from there to another MA program in Canada, in Mass University in Hamilton, and then got a second MA and PhD there, then moved over to Alberta for a postdoctoral fellowship for 2 years, and moved back to Ontario for a year and taught at Waterloo, and then moved back to Alberta, and I've been here since forever. And I'm now a retired emeritus professor.
Wow, what a
So
wonderful, that's
that's how it
amazing.
started. And there was a lot of interesting activities going on. And there's one experience I always talk about that I saw, and I didn't understand it. This was uh, I'm trying to remember. I guess it was in those 2 years prior to my first master's degree. I was in Philadelphia working as in a hippie restaurant, and Guru Maharaji, the Divine Light and Mission young master, he hit North America as the 16-year-old perfect master, was coming to town. So my buddy Tom arranged for us to be driven to a church, and driving the car was a woman, I guess in her 20s. She had a young child, and the 20-year-old's grandmother was there. So there were four generations minus the mother, probably in her 40s or something. Drove to the church, and it was just filled with Divine Light Mission people. All the men, they at the time they looked like IBM executives. All the men were tie and coat and well dressed. The women looked like Earth mothers, long dresses and so on. And we were packed in that church. I was in pain. My hips were twisted. I was packed so tightly. And at one point, somebody walked out on the stage and said, does anyone have a car? We forgot the pillow for Maharaji's lotus feet. All right, someone had a car. They went and got the pillow, I guess. Came back. Now, it took me years to figure out who that was. The person who came back and made that announcement was Rennie Davis, one of the big anti-war activists in that period. And he made the transition from radical politics to mystical religion. He converted to Guru Maharaji. Finally, Maharaji came out, and I was underwhelmed, to say the least.
Really?
And you'll forgive the colonialist racism in this bit of the story, but it is what I remember. Maharaji was talking about levels of spiritual development. He said, "Oh, if you're a native in a tribe in Africa, and a Piper Cub flies over your head, you're going to go, oh, look at the big airplane. But we know that they're 747s." And I'm listening to this saying, this is nonsense. This is not okay. So I wanted no part of this. Driving back to the car, Tom and I were listening to the 20-year-old and the grandmother speak. And they'd been so moved by this talk, they were thinking about coming back the next day and kissing Maharaji's lotus feet. And we were in the same room for the same presentation and a completely different interpretation of it. So that threw me. I didn't understand what was going on there. And it took me a couple of years, once I was in graduate school, to find an article, a sociology article called Worshipping the Absurd. And sociologists had noticed how absurd Maharaji's teachings were, but located that absurdity in the youth cultural frustration of that period. Anti-war, frustration about the protest apparently not ending the war, tensions with parents, a dissatisfaction with ordinary churches, and so on. And so the culture was absurd. And Maharaji epitomized that absurdity. Well, so I was studying religion at that point, and then just continued in my PhD was on sectarian groups in the 1650s in England. I studied especially Quaker, the rise of Quakerism in that period. It was after the English Civil War, and a lot of political and social controls had fallen apart. And people had made big investments in the parliamentary side to defeat the king, but also a part of that was abolishing tithes. The obligatory obligation for people to pay 10% of their wealth or their money to the local minister. And a lot of these Puritans did not respect the local minister. So the part of the Civil War for the ordinary people was getting rid of tithes. Parliamentary side won the war. Tithes weren't abolished. Tremendous political frustration and anger. And especially in this period, they turned to religion. So they had all the apocalyptic explosions of messianic expectations that I saw parallels to in the groups that are active in the 1970s. So I used the modern theoretical material on sex and cults and the religions to study the 1650s. So about a year and a half into my postdoctoral fellowship, uh, I realized nobody cared about the 1650s. I was going to be unemployed in 6 months. So I put together a grant proposal to study the movement of sex and cults between Canada and the U.S. I got the grant, and I started studying. Now, this is a period, excuse me, before the internet. So the way one did research is went to newspaper uh, indexes, annual big thick indexes, and looked up topics. So you could look up Divine Mission and Scientology and Unification Church and Children of God, and they list the newspapers that had articles. I did that. I printed. I went to microfilm, got the articles, printed them off, and often they named people. So I went to phone books and found the people and called them up and started interviewing them. And then the stories, some of the stories were just astonishing. And methodologically, according to a lot of my colleagues at the time, I was making a big methodological mistake. I was talking to former members and the families of members, and there was a huge reaction in the 1970s, 1980s, early 1990s about disregarding, disrespecting, ignoring, criticizing, not believing the accounts of people who had left groups, apostates. And the arguments were that they were angry, they were deceptive, they were trying to get revenge, they were trying to whitewash their own involvements, and so on. And the reason I think behind this criticism is a lot of academics were favorable toward these groups for a number of reasons. And apostates were doing a lot of damage to the group's reputations. They had inside knowledge, and these groups didn't want that knowledge to come out. Now, there were some scams. I mean, but the basic point is with apostate stories is this is common sense. You check them.
Right.
They tell you something, you check it. It's that old story in international arms control negotiations. Believe but verify. And often these people were able to support what they were saying, and the support sometimes came from other people. Sometimes people tell me stories, and I would say, "What? Can you prove that?" They go into another room, come back with a document. So, so I was getting, and also by this time, a lot of the adults who had kids in the group, and these adults have been collecting documents for a long time, trying to figure out what their kids are in. And by this time, a number of former members had come out too with documents. They were looking for a permanent home for this material to preserve it. I was the right age. I was in an academic institution. People started donating material.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, and then I just got so much. Now it's the collection's become something of a nightmare because it's so large. Universities lacking funding. I feel like I'm being punished for being successful with it, but the story's ongoing about how it's going to get preserved for the long term. Anyway, so I got material, and I guess the first time I realized that my perspective was differing from my colleagues, as I wrote an article about the Children of God's founder David Berg. Now, you and your listeners probably know a bit about Children of God. It's an intensely sexualized cult. Did a lot of sexual abuse of children. So I was reading the Children of God material, thinking, where does this come from? And the material revealed that David Berg had a complicated childhood, where he'd been sexually assaulted by a, a nursemaid, and he enjoyed it, but he got shamed for his sexual experiences. His mother caught him once masturbating and threatened to cut off his penis. The guy was really, and he got some of his relatives caught Berg and his cousin fooling around, and they were peeking out from behind walls, and so he was shamed a lot by his experience with early childhood sex. And when his mother died in, I forget the date, late 68, 1969, he went to her funeral and he exploded. This rage had built up for decades against his mother about his sexual repression. And once she died at the funeral, he just blew up. So the cap, the cork that held all this frustration had been pulled open. And that was the basis for me to begin to analyze the sexualized origins of David Berg's teachings. So I wrote an article. It was going to come out, notice I said going to come out, in an annual publication. The publisher advertised the forthcoming publication by sending around notices to academics. And a scholar found out about it, who was favorable to the Children of God, contacted another scholar who was editing a volume on the Children of God favorably. They got in touch with the Children of God, and the scholar worked with the Children of God to threaten the publisher with the possibility of lawsuit if the article came out. Now, they hadn't read the article, and I know they hadn't read the article because I had initially called it Lustful God. And one of the reviewers said, well, you're not really talking about a lustful God, you're talking about a lustful prophet. So the final copy was called Lustful Prophet, and all the responses about lustful God, he hadn't read the article. But because I was using, he said, accounts from former members, he dismissed it all, and the publisher had no backbone. He didn't know me. He didn't want to fight. He didn't need to agree. So he pulled that article, yanked it. And I had another article coming out the year later on Scientology. I lost 2 articles from this.
Oh my gosh.
And I spent, I don't know, a year and a half trying to get that Lustful Prophet article published. And finally, a small journal that was critical of abuses in these groups agreed to publish it. And I've been loyal to that journal ever since that time. But the reaction I got from some colleagues, I remember one very well-known sociologist said something like, Steve, I've always liked your work, but this article, I don't like this article. And I think he didn't like it because it wasn't sociological. It was getting into the area of psychohistory, what was going on in Berg's mind that translated into group doctrines and behaviors. Sociologists weren't talking about that psychological area. So I was drifting into non-sociological territory. And then I got material about some of the abuses that were going on in Scientology. at this time, and because I was talking to a lot of people, once some individuals decided, I realized that I was not a Scientology spy because the group was notorious for having people go in to talk with potential sources and pretend they were out or interested in reporters and just really gathering info. Once people decided I wasn't a spy, they started telling me stuff and giving me documents. And I was going, oh my God. And one of the things that really concerned me, even on a human rights effort, was Scientology's operation of what was called the Rehabilitation Project Force, the RPF. It's called different. It probably doesn't exist now. Probably closed down, I think, in about 2016. But it operated for at least 40 years in the United States, in the UK, in Denmark, Australia. And it was what a lot of critics call Scientology's prison system. I called it a brainwashing program. Scientology had set up an alternative cultural structure, with alternative therapy and odd beliefs about raising children. So alternative family structures and beliefs, pseudo medical practices, and its own internal pseudo legal system. And for Sea Org members who the organization declared it deviated, they got thrown to the RPF. And I talked to some people who've been in this. It was a really restrictive program where I think it was you had to work 8 hours a day, study for 5 hours a day, restrictions on how long you ate and slept and so on. And even in those rules, they got broken all the time. It was essentially a nearly free labor source for Scientology. Consequently, when Scientology had big projects, big building projects, for example, or property rehabilitation projects, they used RPFers. And I was getting accounts of people who were working without sleep for 3 days.
Oh my gosh.
They hadn't slept. I remember one person said, I think it was a woman who told me this, she was working on something and asked a colleague, tried to ask another RPFer to give her a screwdriver. And it was, can you give me the peanut butter dogs flying in the sky? It just came out as gibberish. She was so exhausted. And there were issues about safety. People were using saws when they were exhausted. Some of the work conditions they had, the things they had to do were just dangerous. And this is wrong. So I started publishing all the RPF, and that got me in trouble with Scientology.
I bet.
Yeah, and also because people were afraid of it, academics weren't talking to the press. And I was real quiet for a long time, just biding my time. And I don't know, somebody found me. And, I got interviewed. And as you know, with the press, if a person's name shows up once, it gets passed around. And so pretty soon I was getting a lot of phone calls about Scientology. And, I had a fair amount of documents and some knowledge about the group. So that got me in trouble. I was, at this time, Scientology is active in Germany. So I went to Germany and I was talking about some of Scientology's abuses, including the RPF. Got followed in Germany. I landed, I guess, in Hamburg at one point, and there was a big Scientology critic, government official, who picked me up. The next day, her security team, 2 guys, came up to me and said, do you know these people? And they showed me pictures of, I think, 2 guys who apparently were there to monitor either her and or me. And they were suspected of being Scientologists. And we got followed in restaurants. Years later, I had a person in Canada tell me that I went to a conference in Toronto and I got followed, which means the Scientologists saw me go to a lot of used bookstores. If I had known, I would have asked a Scientologist to help me carry the books. I didn't know. I thought I might be, but anyway. So, and it just went on from there. and I started getting more calls of it in different groups. So here we are.
So did you, I mean, obviously they were following you. That was obvious to you. Did you ever have any physical threats of violence?
Never had any physical threats. There was a long series of correspondence between Scientologists and my and university officials trying to get me silenced, trying to get me in trouble with my institution. And the institution's position was essentially within boundaries. You get free speech, and unless I crossed some really terrible line, the university wasn't going to get involved in it. And I think the university officials knew Scientology's reputation. So I don't think I've ever been physically threatened, but I was alarm systems everywhere. Got my home address removed from my driver's license. I was just expecting. I had a campus-wide parking permit, so I could park in most places on campus to alternate where my car was. I was cautious when I was driving around to see if I was followed. At one time, I never remember the name of the city I was in Germany, and the fashion shoots, the German constitutional police wanted to talk to me, and a cab picked me up. And we're going to the office of the fashion shoots, and the taxi is going this way and that way and making U-turns and going in circles. And at one point I thought, I've been kidnapped. Well, it was the taxi driver was used by the fashion shoots for security reasons. And he was just doing everything to make sure we weren't being followed. So it was interesting.
Well, interesting is putting it mildly, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, Children of God had a prayer out against me. And I guess it worked. I mean, I got old and bald, so I guess I got punished by God. I don't know.
Wow. And what happened with Ernst Sundell?
I wasn't involved in that case. He was in Toronto. There was a case. I won't say a whole lot about it. A white racist case in Alberta. A school teacher and occasional principal was teaching Holocaust denying activities in the classroom in his students, and so that's all I'm saying about it.
Okay. Yeah, I know that it's an interesting time to even broach those topics, right? Sometimes, but I appreciate that. So, I mean, how long did this intimidation go on?
It's hard to say because I never really knew fully what was going on. And once there's I forget the year, but probably early '90s. It probably is this Toronto conference. I didn't know it at the time, but I think it was the conference organizer got a phone call around midnight from Scientology. I think it was from Scientology, trying to block my presentation the next day. That I don't know was about Scientology or Children of God or so on. So there was that direct effort to silence me. To, in this case, not block a publication, but block a conference presentation. So I don't know what was going on. And then I started testifying as an expert witness in Scientology cases about some of these abuses. And so I wasn't quiet. So I'm not surprised that Scientology wasn't thinking of me as a buddy. I went to the headquarters in Los Angeles, interviewed the International Church of Scientology president at the time, Heber Jansch, met with Scientologists in Montreal and Toronto. So I tried to make that. It's just the material I was getting, uh, painted a very negative picture, a very abusive picture about the way this group and then a lot of other groups were interacting with their members, their followers.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, I guess that's something that you learn to live with, but that is still just is a very frightening. I mean, that grates on you. I would imagine that was grating on you for that period of time.
The worst, absolute worst, was in the early '90s when I was getting satanic ritual abuse accounts. Now, the academic community talks about satanic panic and if it wasn't true and whatnot. And at the time, I was working for free with a police intelligence unit, and we were getting all kinds of accounts and did a couple of investigations, none of which we could ever prove. So I never had definitive proof that any of these accounts were true, and had some definitive proof that basically some of them weren't. But there are other parts of the accounts some of the accounts that still haunt me. Um, and this was violent stuff. Allegation about child sacrifice and urine drinking and rituals and a lot of abuse against especially women and children. I probably either talked and or received, I think the figure was something like 75 accounts. Um, and it got to the point I wrote 2 articles that got criticized, wrote a response, and then I stopped. I said, I can't do anymore. Unless there's something definitive I can prove, I've said all that I can. Um, and, at the same time as we started learning more about violence from groups like ISIS, that really did terribly destructive, violent things against women, especially, and children. Nothing I was hearing dissuaded me from the possibility that at least some of these accounts were accurate. I heard mention of an account just a couple of weeks ago from someone who claimed she had been trafficked as a child in, I think it was probably the Canadian province of Saskatchewan. And she's convinced that the group to which she was trafficked was a satanic group. I don't know. I mean, what I hate to say it made sense, but if people believe that Satan exists, that the spiritual realm exists, and that Satan is the god of this world, and these people are being sexually deviant, I can see how they would worship Satan as a means to sanctify their abusive, deviant behaviors. It's a good theory. I'm not sure. I can't tell you whether it's true, but that material was absolutely the worst. Absolutely the worst. And to this day, it doesn't matter what I believe. It matters what I can prove. And I can't prove the content of most of these accounts. They were parts of some of the accounts that had levels of verification, but nothing definitive. So
what I mean, do you think that a majority of the people were making stories up or trying to feed into, I know here in Utah we've had a sheriff now who's promoting the satanic sexual abuse and pointing figures at specific political figures, which I don't think there's a lot of verification. You can't verify any of these things. And I think that's kind of a political stunt. And we're seeing those types of things happen, in different states here in America. But was there
what the Hillary Clinton Pizzagate eating babies kind of, some of that was going on in the period in which I was actively studying these issues. But most of the accounts I got were different. Now, I did see one account especially. This was a police investigation I think it was down in Medicine Hat, Alberta, where the counselor had cultivated an intense dependency on the part of the person. It seemed to us that the counselor had created an environment in which the client manufactured things to please the counselor. So we saw that. Uh, and there were other accounts where people told us things and they weren't true. Uh, Now, this gets into issues about mental health. The first time I interviewed somebody uh, whom I came to believe well into the interview was schizophrenic was a person who was making satanic ritual abuse allegations. And I was with the RCMP. We picked her up and took her down to RCMP headquarters in Edmonton. And I don't know, she had I think she had contacted me somehow. Anyway, she was making allegations against political figure, prominent business person. Okay, tell us your story. And it was terrible. It was just awful. Okay, so tell us your story. And this went on, and she couldn't do it. There was just no substance to it. Uh, and at one point, she told us, I think that the business person was in cahoots with the political leader. Well, in reality, the two of them hated each other. So so it finally dawned upon me that this probably was, I didn't have mental health training, but this is probably a schizophrenic fantasy. There's another time outside of the city, about an hour or so outside of Edmonton, I went with a cop to interview a woman who was making satanic ritual abuse allegations involving prominent sports figures. And there was snow on the ground. And she said something like, every night they come outside in a basement apartment, come outside to the window out there and harass me. So we went outside and walked to the window. There's no footprints. It's nothing. The apartment she lived in, you could have eaten off the floor. It was so clean. And she had something of a recognized career. But we then went to a lunch, and the cop asked her, well, does your family know about these allegations? What do they think? She said, yeah, my father says I'm schizophrenic. All right. So then she said, but I can prove it. She went back to her apartment, came back with a book on sports. And I think she had allegations against the members of the Edmonton Oilers hockey team. And there'd be phrases like, Wayne Gretzky sliced across the ice. She said, look, sliced? See? That's proof. And in her schizophrenic mind, there was the proof. I mean, it was another case. I got so concerned by a woman who had sent me journals. I called a local police department, I think it was in Montana, and said, I'm worried about this woman. She's got a German Shepherd dog. She's got a rifle. She thinks police are coming to get. Anyway, so I saw schizophrenia. I saw counseling manipulation. And then there's other accounts. And all I can tell you is that some of these people were absolutely terrified. And it wasn't all just women. Mostly women. I remember one guy was just freaked about his memories. He called memories. And I don't know, I can't. He talked about his grandfather. Above the grandfather's bed, there was a storage closet, and he had a ritualistic animal head that I can't get into this guy's bedroom to check that stuff. So I don't know. I realized I'm going to go to my grave not knowing for sure about some of these accounts.
Right. Absolutely. And I have to ask you too, I want to get into this subject so people understand, like when you have, what are the warning signs that you're looking for with regard to a cult or a figure, an abusive person that is trying to pull you in? What are the like vulnerabilities, and how are people manipulated into joining a cult or becoming involved with someone
Well,
dangerous?
people have in personal predispositions. That is to say, all of us have histories, autobiographical histories. We all have them. And some people's biographies are pretty intense. A lot of people have had very bad family experiences, very bad social experiences, and they're really looking to try to make meaning out of their lives, make meaning of what they've been through. So these people can be susceptible for reasons that are not their fault. Um, Moreover, at the same time that individuals are predisposed to finding answers, groups are out there looking for members. Not all groups are looking for members, but a lot of them are. They want recruits. And if the two come together, if a seeker runs into or finds or gets located by a recruiting group, the chances increase about joining. Moreover, uh, a lot of conversions to groups go through social networks. People join groups that their friends or family are already part of. And that kind of conversion experience reduces people's caution. Well, my cousin's involved, my sister's involved. It's got to be okay. The issues, however, that that set off alarm bells for me often involve the claims by the leaders themselves. One of the most common uh, danger signals is for leaders who believe that they are somehow godly, receiving messages from God, God's agent, God's messenger, and so on. And a lot of these people either certainly are or probably are narcissists. And narcissists can be very dangerous. So I get, I'm really suspicious when I hear these grandiose claims about who they are, what their mission is, and so on. Um, but narcissists can attract huge followings. And we don't even see it in religious context. We see it in the political realm too. Uh, so the part of the expansion of the study of cults has looked increasingly at the social psychology of groupthink, how people individually get attracted to odd set of beliefs, and then uh, through interaction with other members, sometimes online, uh, foster and expand and develop those off-center belief systems. In the old days, there's been odd belief systems for millennia, but you had to find out through word of mouth. Maybe you get a pamphlet, maybe you'd find a book. Now, you type. And this odd world of, it's called the cultic milieu, all those off center, non mainstream, often disreputable beliefs are in a cauldron of this cultic milieu. And once a person starts getting involved in one of those odd beliefs, very often they branch out, they start interconnecting. So you'll find anti government people who are involved in medical and anti vaccine activities, believe in odd diets, believe. I just got an email yesterday, I think, from a person, uh, an adult, whose mother and stepfather get involved in flat Earth theories and anti-vaccine and the whole odd political beliefs that swirl around. So a person with odd beliefs and then get drawn into an expansive world. And and there's only so many hours in the day, and these groups, I know, MAGA says, do your own research. Well, if the research you're doing is all inside the bubble, you're going to be convinced that you've got it right.
Right.
So, uh, so I, what the leaders say is a giveaway, and then also issues about the extent to which these groups are what sociologists would call greedy institutions. Greedy institutions just take as much time as they can, and some of them become total institutions, where that's all you do is uh, what the group says you do. You get locked in the confines. Maybe you live in a commune or an isolated farm, or even in an urban center. But all you do is interact with people from that group in very controlled circumstances. That's really dangerous. Uh, in the modern world, all of us are multifaceted individuals. So you're talking to me as a professor, but I got, got friends and family, and I'd like to say I've got hobbies. I'm not sure that's true, but we play different roles. In these groups, people's roles get diminished.
Okay.
And they get diminished in the context of what the group says they should do. And a very common set of techniques is for a group to help people realize that a major part of their past was just dangerous, harmful, satanic, evil. So people, in using various techniques, have to give up their own parts of their autobiographies through an interpretation that it's bad, at the same time that the group is then introducing as replacements its own beliefs about their biographies, and then about people's aspirations and goals and so on. Techniques are very widely, from born again experiences to, I was a sinner and now I'm saved, to Scientology's auditing, where Scientologists say identify an issue that's important to you. Thank you. Go back to an early related incident, what you've identified. Go back to early related incident. So people self-identify their problems. And then through auditing, they're told eventually the negative effect of that negative experience is gone. It's cleansed. People can feel an enormous sense of relief. This burden they've carried for so long is gone. It's gone. And look, people have difficult backgrounds. People want families. They want, in some cases, the support and parental figures as adults that they never had as children. And when people get in that kind of environment, good luck convincing them that they're harming themselves, or that the group is harming them.
Wow. And so, I mean, so once a recruiter or somebody that is trying to recruit somebody for a group gets a hold of this person, and they identify their weaknesses and then kind of break them down. What other, if you were to tell somebody, our audience, what for me and you, like right now, what should we be looking for? Because I know you've mentioned in other talks that I've heard you give, that you talk about, especially nowadays with the online ways that different people can use that to recruit people into their organizations or cults. It's become so much. It's not as cut and dry as perhaps it was a few years ago or a couple decades ago. So what are
one of the modern manifestations of cult-related issues that's relatively new is, of course, thinking back to social media. People now build communities online, And again, as people get involved in these communities, they lose sight of issues about harm to themselves. Some of the big issues involve groups that encourage teenage harm or encourage individuals in different cities of the world to engage in acts of brutal violence. And what happens is, if members engage in these activities, their status inside these small communities elevates. They're big. We've all heard of some of the school shooters saying they want to do it better than, bigger than the shooter at Columbine. They want the status, in part because they don't feel they have status in their lives. Now, excuse me, how you get people out of those environments is really tricky. Because again, often, according to social psych literature, if you confront a person directly, they get defensive. You're being stupid, you're being wrong, and the person is being stupid and wrong, but you tell them that, and then the wall goes up. The strategies often involve concerned individuals trying to build emotional and even ideological bridges on some points. See if they can get some areas of initial agreement that helps provide the person inside the group with a different beginnings, the different views of the world and different views of people who are in that external world. So if you can build alternatives for the people, and so, and it's very tough with kids if they're brutalized, if they're shamed or harassed and bullied and whatnot. It requires really extreme, not only family interventions but school interventions. And as we're learning in a recent case, sometimes family members are part of the problem. The family doesn't have the skills or the motivation or the desire even to see or recognize what the kid is going through. So it's a tough one. I'm not going to pretend that I've got big answers on this one, but if you can get people involved in activities in the real world, if they and I think sometimes even get people involved with pets, assuming they don't hurt them. To have some focus of something that needs them, that love and attention, they can play with and so on. But get them outside of that social bubble. And the same goes for people in cults and whatnot. Now, the trouble with adults is because the groups can control them, some people cannot even go to family funerals. Or if they do go to family funerals, they have to go with a buddy, a monitor, someone to make sure that they don't say anything irregular. And even still, you can't guarantee the group isn't going to punish people about what's going on. I don't know if you heard about what happened to some of the North Korean athletes who were performed in the Paris Games. I don't know how many North Korean athletes went. A couple of them won, I think, a couple of medals. And a few of them, I think, two individuals or two groups took selfies. They took selfies of themselves in one case with people from, and these are North Koreans now. They took pictures of themselves with Chinese athletes and South Korean athletes. Oh boy. So they went back to North Korea and they're forced to go through what's called ideological scrubbing. It's a decontamination process. This is an article in Essentially Sports that's online. Olympics disaster for North Korean athletes as they face massive repercussion for friendly behavior. And because the suspicion for authorities is they were corrupted by the contact with the outside world, they have to go through threefold assessment of cleansing. Uh, First, there's and again, I'm based upon this article. The Central Committee's Propaganda and Agitation Department assesses the athlete's behavior um, to try to figure out whether any of their behavior when they were abroad in Paris uh, contradicted the party's propaganda directives and punishments for any transgressions. Then there's a second assessment. It's conducted by the Cabinet's Ministry of Physical Culture and Sports to evaluate whether this behavior uh, impacted students' performance, athletes' performance, to the point whether they should be rewarded for their performance or punished. And then the final assessment is, of course, mutual criticism. The athletes have to go through long sessions where they confess to any inappropriate behavior and they have to criticize others. It's a brainwashing program. And you'll find that some extreme cults have somewhat analogous brainwashing programs. I mean, for a lot of us, North Korea is one of the modern examples of a huge political cult right now. Venerating Kim Jong Un. His family is venerated. Um, I've heard accounts that North Koreans, I can't verify this, are taught that every time he goes out to the golf course, on every tee he hits holes in one. Anything he touches, is charismatically sanctified, and it's holy and whatnot. You'll see people crying in his presence because he's a god figure. Now, a lot of groups have god figures, and this kind of veneration that we see to Kim Jong Un, and the punishments that people go through who deviate in thoughts or behaviors, has some analogies in some of these abusive cults. You want to talk about some of them?
Yes, please. Do you want me to hit the slide? I've got the slide ready to pull. So.
Yeah, put up some slides.
Okay, we'll start with this one.
Now, I won't say a lot about Marshall Applewhite. He was head of Heaven's Gate, and of course, we all know what happened. That his followers, 39 of them, including himself, committed suicide. Critics say what they did was actually murder, but suicide. And Marshall Applewhite almost certainly was schizophrenic, and a particular form of schizophrenia that involved bodily distortions. His understanding about his body and what it did and its dangers were very heightened. And this heightened distortion about body perceptions probably was enhanced by his uncomfortable self-perceptions about his homosexuality. So his body was a source of contention for him because of his homosexuality, and he probably had schizophrenia. And the Heaven's Gate, he was getting messages from his dead former partner Bonnie Nettles. The suicide involved people killing themselves to go up into the sky to a spaceship that was following a comet. So, and you'll find a UFO hallucinations as a feature that appears in a lot of schizophrenia. And Applewhite never struck some of us as being never mean. That is to say, there was one period in the group's history where what he told people, and I think followed up on the promise, that if they wanted to leave, he'd give them some money to help them get established elsewhere. So, in his delusion, there's a good chance he really believed these fantasies, but they were deadly fantasies. Okay, let's get another one.
Okay.
And here's the Heaven's Gate. Some of the 39 people, they all wore uniforms. The Nike shoes. There were, I think, some coins on the side of the bed to help pay for their transition in heaven and so on. And their suicides, if I may use that term, took place over 3 days. So there were members who facilitated other members killing themselves until at the end they all killed themselves. And then for a while later, there were a couple of members who didn't commit suicide. They weren't living in the house, but committed suicide later. They stayed around to try to ensure that Marshall Applewhite's teachings were preserved. And when they did what they could, it's time to join their friends.
Oh my goodness. Okay, let's show the
Elizabeth Clare Prophet. She was the head of Church Universal and Triumphant. It was a group had a fairly long history, but we know about it best because in the late 1990s, she had a large commune in Montana at the base of Yellowstone National Park. And she claimed, and if you put the picture back up, she claimed to receive messages from the ascended masters. So you look on either side, there's an ascended master. You see behind her this flash of bright lights and so on. Elizabeth Clare Prophet had epilepsy. And if you look at the characteristics of epilepsy, it's not a mental health condition, it's a neurological condition, but it has mental health implications. Epileptics often see visions, and they hear voices, and they experience lights, bright lights. And some people say that she developed a religion out of her epileptic visions. Now, they became apocalyptic. She believed there was going to be a Soviet attack, and her followers, based upon her teachings, built the largest bomb shelter complex, civilian bomb shelter complex in North America. If I'm not mistaken, one of the shelters underground was the size of 3 football fields. And it was dangerous because the people building the shelters were followers who weren't skilled builders. And so there were construction problems and real dangers. She expected an attack in 1990. I think for 3 days, her followers went underground and nothing happened. Now, keep in mind that building a bomb shelter is expensive. And these people, for the most part, weren't really rich. And there are stories about a lot of the followers running up their credit cards, running back and forth to a local town buying supplies. And it's tragically funny. The story I heard is that, they were racing back and forth on the highway, and the cops just sat on the highway and picked them off for speeding. And there were stories about the speeders getting pulled over by the cops, being told they were speeding, and just smiling because the world was going to end. They weren't going to have to pay their tickets. Well, that didn't work.
Whoops.
So the group fell apart. A lot of people's lives were very damaged because they were in heavy debt. Aside from the emotional feelings of being distraught at the failure of the prophecies. So, if you want, there's some more pictures about. Yeah, these are entry into one of the bomb shelters. Now, the bomb shelters were built underground at the foot of mountains involving Yellowstone National Park. National Park. That location meant that there was a lot of granite in the ground. And what you may know is that granite usually has high amounts of radon in it. And radon is cancer-causing drug. I'm not sure whether the glaciers went down as far as Salt Lake City, where you are, but they certainly went through Alberta. And I had trouble in my house about high radon levels. And what you have to do is get a pump, and it pulls out the air from under the foundation and so on, and sends it out to the air. So these bomb shelters had high amounts of radon in them. So on that ground alone, they were dangerous. And there's one more picture. So these kids look happy. Yeah, well, these kids don't look happy. It was a real trauma for some kids because they were being upset. I seem to recall reading a policy that said if kids really misbehaved, lock them outside the door. Lock them outside the contained bomb shelter.
That's
I don't
nice.
know. You can't do too much from a picture. I don't think these kids look happy at all. And they got all this protective gear, I guess they had to be prepared to put on. So,
You know, you say the granite, and I just have to think that the LDS temple is made of granite.
you can get little cigarette pack size radon monitors and put them in places that they give you a pretty good reading. And I don't know what it means, but the reading for the one I used was 150 was high. The house is at over 200, and I think that's common for people in this part of Western Canada and Western U.S. So,
yeah, we have definitely an issue with that here. Absolutely, that is really interesting. Thanks for sharing that. That's amazing. Okay, so we've got this.
now, okay, it's Jim Jones. We all know him. It's a good chance he had a delusional disorder, accentuated, aggravated by polysubstance abuse. He was taking a lot of pills. And these delusional disorders probably involve persecution disorders and delusions of grandeur. So he had these persecution disorders, the delusion of grandeur, and they were just amplified and confused and made much worse by all the pills he was taking. And you know, in the end, we all know I see different figures about over 909 of his followers committed murder-suicide. And it's murder-suicide because at least a third of the people were either very young or very old, age groups in which people are supposed to be protected. And he had guards walking around with rifles to try to ensure nobody escaped and so on. A couple of people got away, but not many. So there was a mental health issue almost certainly behind Jones. And he got really sadistic, terrible abuses about kids. He is having sex with men and women and using his sexual experiences as means of socially controlling them in the group, humiliating them, breaking them down to be under his power and so on.
Wow.
You got somebody else?
Yep, there you go.
Yeah, I feel bad for the manufacturers of Kool-Aid because they didn't drink Kool-Aid, but it's often called, there's that phrase, drinking the Kool-Aid. Well, they drank a cyanide mixture. It had nothing to do with Kool-Aid, but it was a drink that had some resemblance to Kool-Aid, and Kool-Aid's gotten a bad rap for it. And of course, the parents forced the cyanide down the throats of their children. Jones made sure that the children died first, and the parents participated in their murder. They're tapes about the final moments, and they're just.
I've heard, yeah.
Words cannot express. Okay, pick somebody else.
Okay.
This is Bonnie Nettles and
Oh, okay.
Applewhite. And now um, Nettles was a nurse, but apparently she, excuse me, reinforced Applewhite's schizophrenic delusions. And that reinforcement is important because for a leader to be charismatic, the leader um, has to make remarkable claims.
Okay.
But if the person does not get support for those remarkable claims, the person making the claims is considered to be mentally ill as opposed to religious. And then once somebody accepts, or a group of people accepts claims, they have to form a group to support the leader and further them along. There's a really interesting phenomenon called the Jerusalem syndrome. It it got named because it frequently happens in Jerusalem when people go there and are just overwhelmed by the religious presence, the history and whatnot. And a lot of the people wind up thinking they're Jesus. They're religious figures. I had uh, a Jewish friend who went there, and she came back. She was a fairly secular Jew. She came back a super Jew, and she became very orthodox. She brought in a rabbi to burn off all the residue on her frying pans because of contamination and so on. She eventually calmed down. And the same phenomenon exists when people go to Hawaii or sometimes go to Paris. They just get overwhelmed by the presence. But in Israel, psychiatrists know how to treat Jerusalem syndrome. They expect it. So if a person makes claims there about being God figure, probably not believed. If a person outside of that environment, like Bonnie Nettles, starts believing that Marshall Applewhite is having a religious message, then he's got somebody reinforcing. And then they went on the road and started preaching, and they got followers. So charisma is a threefold process: the claims, the acceptance, and then the following. You've got to have all three for a charismatic figure to be a figure to be a charismatic figure. Okay. Oh, this guy is frightening. The Rocktario, he is a religious figure born in Quebec. The final commune that blew up was in the bush in Ontario. Um, Here in his commune, he had, I think, 9 concubines, 9 wives. He had something like 26 children with him. And he, after he got imprisoned, he got diagnosed as being narcissistic, with sadism and alcoholism combined. That's just a dangerous combination. Uh, so he was a sadistic alcoholic narcissist. In the late 1970s, he was forming a commune so people could listen to his talks and so on. And the combination of those 3 disorders just made him a monster. He brutalized his followers. He had them break their own legs with sledgehammers, sit on lit stoves, shoot each other in the shoulders, eat dead mice and feces. A follower sometimes would be asked to cut off another's toes or whatnot with wire cutters. And he abused the cult's children, sexually abused them, held them over fires, nailed them to trees while their students threw stones at them. But so that's bad enough. But when he got drunk, he was convinced he had medical healing powers. And one of the women complained her stomach hurt. He got her down on a table. I think nailed her down, cut her open, and ripped out part of her intestines with his bare hands. And of course, she died, although I don't think she died instantly. But Theriot claimed he had the power of resurrection, so he got his followers to cut off the top of her skull so he could masturbate in it to bring her back to life. And he made a necklace out of her ribs and wore it around his neck in the commune. And then later on, the woman who he assigned to stitch her up, he would burn this woman's genitals with a welding torch. He removed 8 of her teeth forcibly, cut off parts of her breasts, smashed her head with an axe, cut off a finger, and then he used a meat cleaver to cut off one of her arms. She survived. He cut off her arm and then he cauterized it with a hot iron. And of course, there's no anesthetic in any of these things. And I don't remember how many days afterwards she lived. And at some point afterward, yeah, she's probably one of these, 8 or 9 women here. She escaped. And this place is way back in the bush. And she escaped, finally got contact with the police and so on. And he got in prison for assaulting her, then eventually got convicted of murder for the first woman. And now the story gets weird. Because he got thrown into a notorious Canadian prison. And 3 of the women who went through all these abuses moved to that town where the prison was, moved down the street from the prison entry, started a bakery so they could be close to Roch Theriot and have conjugal visits with him in prison. See, he fathered 26 children. He had 4 children once he was in jail, in prison with these 3 followers. And, over the years, I hear one story like this and go, but there were several accounts of women who, including some of the Manson women, who'd been under the thumb of these really abusive men. They died, they got imprisoned, and they still remained attached to them. It didn't make any sense to me until I found a concept that was being developed in usually regarding women, sometimes children who are being trafficked, especially sex trafficked. Trauma coerced attachment. And being in an enclosed environment for so long where one's only hope of surviving was attachment to the leader, because the leader held all control over the person's life, they developed attitudes that the leader was grandiose, that his mission was somehow sacred, and they had positive feelings of love and loyalty to the person, despite all the abuse. Having those feelings was a way of self-protection, oddly enough. And so these feelings of coerced traumatic attachment often carried over for people even after they were out of the leader's immediate control. And that's what I think was going on with these women with Roch Theriot. Okay, pull up some more. This is the woman who lost her arm. Look at her right ham, the arm that's a hook. That's the woman who somehow survived. Okay. There he is. The king of his community with the crown and the robes. We'll see a lot of these figures are very attached to themselves in robes, but keep going. I can't hear you.
I think that those are all the slides that I have.
You have none about Moon?
Let me go in and check really quickly. Because I know, unless I thought I had downloaded.
It would be the first set probably I sent.
Let's see, there was the one final narcissist, the schizophrenia, epilepsy.
Before that one.
Let's see. Let me get those on there. And if you want to it'll take me a second.
Okay, well, I can talk.
I'm slacking on my job here. Okay.
Technology.
I know, I'm telling you, it's my friend. As everybody knows, not really. That's okay.
Well, we know about Moon. Sun Myung Moon. A lot of people call him Reverend Moon. He wasn't a reverend. He had no theological training. He's a self-appointed reverend. And also he got called doctor because he had a number of honorary degrees, some of which were from universities owned and controlled by the Unification Church. Moon had grandiose visions about who he was and himself. Were you able to find the slides? You're looking.
You keep talking. I am.
Okay.
Yep.
And so Moon identified himself and his wife as true parents of mankind. And also, as it expanded, true parents of the cosmos, of the universe. And consequently, they set up a number of ceremonies in which they got crowned according to the beliefs that they were cosmologically and universally divinely ordained. They had a divine mission from God. They were fulfilling Jesus' failed mission on earth. Jesus. Okay. There might be one. Is there a slide before this?
Hang on, I'm just getting all of them loaded in right now.
Well, I'll tell you what. I'll talk about this one. This is one of 3 palaces that Moon built for himself. This is dedicated in 2006. And you'll notice, looking at it, it seems to be a combination of the White House and the U.S. Senate building. And it's probably intended to be that way. You'll notice this was a ceremony where Moon and his wife got crowned the King and Queen of Peace. And he had a banquet for himself, he and his wife, for about 680 people. Over 2,000 people watched this ceremony. You'll see in the middle, the red carpet and this white line going up. That's the elevator that Moon and his wife rode up the steps, up to the top of where the ceremony took place. The building cost $1 billion to construct.
Oh, wow.
And the ceremony involved people from 120 countries giving Moon and his wife each a crown to signify their relationship over all nations. So inside the building, there are display cabinets that display 240 crowns, 140 for Moon and 140 for his, 120 for Moon, 120 for his wife. Do you have any of the other pictures about Moon? No, back. We'll talk about him. Well, I can, as you're looking for the other pictures, I'll talk about him.
I've got this one right here.
Nope. No, we'll come to him too. If you can go back to Moon.
Let's see. Praise the Lord.
Here's a picture of Moon and his wife in some of their regalia. Moon very much liked to have himself portrayed in robes. Now look at the back. See that it says Dirksen Senate Office Building. Moon and his wife got crowned in a ceremony in a U.S. government Senate building in 2004. Yeah,
Fascinating.
one of the a member of the Democratic House of Representatives uh, carried the crowns up to the moons, wearing white gloves, and put it on their heads. And afterwards, he declared himself to be humanity's savior, Messiah, the Lord, and true parent. So this is Moon's grandiosity, and it manifested in these robes, in these ceremonies, in these crowns, in these palaces, and this self-perception about who he was. Okay, let's go to another one. Is there one before this? Rajneesh?
Let's see.
There he is. Speaking of robes, Rajneesh also he had special tailors. He was impeccably dressed in robes and so on. This is a picture from Rajneesh in the 1980s in a large commune in Oregon. A lot of people probably know about this from the Netflix show. Uh, uh, and flash on to that next picture, the one you showed.
Oh, whoops, this one.
Here he is. Rajneesh, as a narcissist, loved adulation. It's called narcissistic supply, when narcissists feed off the attention they get. I noticed, even before I knew the concept, when Donald Trump walked up on stage, in many times, the audience is applauding. He started applauding. And it struck me that he wasn't applauding the audience. He was applauding so the audience would keep applauding him and applaud more. That's narcissistic supply. And in Oregon, Rajneesh had, I don't know, 92 or 93 Rolls Royces. And every day, he'd slowly drive down a road, and his followers would stand at the side of the road and throw flowers on his car and wave to him and whatnot. You'll notice the person to the right of the car, you can't really see it well. He's a guard. He's carrying a rifle. So so the fear that Rajneesh was going to get attacked. Now, what happened in the community is that it collapsed in 1985. There were just a lot of legal issues going on. Rajneesh got convicted of issues about immigration, fraud, and so on. After the commune collapsed, 26 members were charged with 41 crimes, all committed in an attempt to further the Rajneesh vision. The crimes included attempted murder, arson, immigration crimes, racketeering, and wiretap conspiracy. The wiretapping involved electronic eavesdropping inside the Rajneesh buildings, and it at the time, and I think it still probably is, it was the largest electronic eavesdropping case in American history.
Really?
But also, what happened is that the Rajneeshis were trying to take over the local community. It was a sparsely populated community, and there was a town fairly close called the Dales. And the Rajneeshis were testing out a system to make people sick so they wouldn't vote, so the Rajneeshis could flood the voting polls and win. What they did, they had a number of highly skilled, medically trained people. They developed strains of salmonella. And they had, I think, I talked to a person who was a cleaner there, and I think she said there were 13 Quonset huts she had to clean. And she cleaned 12 of them. She couldn't get into the 13th one. And she asked somebody, "Why can't I get in there to clean the building?" She got moved out of that position a few days later. That's where the salmonella is being made.
Okay.
And what the followers did is they put the salmonella in little vials, and they put it in their hands, and they went into the Dales, into salad bars, I think at Pizza Hut. And as they were scooping out the salad, they were actually shaking salmonella into the salad bars, and 751 people got salmonella poisoning. One of the people was a pregnant woman. It was a test run to see if they could use that technique to screw up the election. It was the biggest bioterror attack in American history. Second, perhaps only to the use of smallpox blankets that some American settlers used against indigenous peoples. It's a huge. It was a terrorism attack. Okay, keep going.
Okay, let's see.
There's one in front before this.
Is it this one?
Before that. There he is. Gilbert Bourdin. He was head of a French group called Mandarin, and he had this grandiose vision of who he was. He had incredible titles about. I have some notes about what he called himself. He gave himself the title of His Holiness Lord Hamsa Madhara. I don't know what that means, but he was the cosmoplanetary messiah of synthesis, Christ returning to Earth, the great master of the Order of the Knights of the Triumphant Vajra, instigator of the Pyramid Temple of Unity, and master of the selection of souls. Now, I don't know what any of that stuff means, other than he is pretty important. He had some cosmic importance to the whole creation. And as part of his self-importance, go on to the next slide, if you would, please.
Is it this? Hopefully this one.
Before that.
Okay, let's see.
Yeah, we'll come back to this guy.
Okay. I keep wanting to show this guy for some reason.
Yeah, we'll talk. There it is.
Okay.
He oversaw in 1990 the creation of a 30-meter high statue to himself. It's over 100 feet tall, because he was the cosmoplanetary messiah of synthesis. And of course, his followers were going to build this because their leader was cosmologically transcendent. Well, the trouble is, they didn't get a building permit, because if you're building to the cosmoplanetary messiah of synthesis, who can get in the way? Well, the local officials could get in the way. So they built this thing, and finally local officials were saying, this doesn't meet code. So here's the statue. Next slide. They blew it up. And this is the statue being blown up. He died, I think in 1993 or something. 1998. So now let's get on to the picture you want to.
Okay. But this is calling me for some reason.
Gurmeet Ram Rahim Singh. He was a major sectarian leader in India. If your followers want some bizarre entertainment, look up Messenger of God, the film's Messenger of God. He made grandiose films about himself as a mighty warrior fighting the sources of evil and so on. He had a thing for gadgets. And so this is one of his, ultra souped up motorcycles and so on. He made films about himself being a superhero, messenger of God. So he was big into toys and films and so on. But he's now serving 20 years for 2 rapes of followers. He was a very manipulative and abusive guru. So on the one hand, I believe he built a hospital. On the other hand, under the hospital, he was having surgeons or doctors carry out castrations of young men because knowing that young men, especially in India, who were castrated would experience extreme shame, couldn't go back to their families, couldn't have children. And so he wanted them as his soldiers, as his army. So between the rapes and the castrations, he's in jail for 20 years. When he got put in jail, there were massive riots in India, massive riots involving thousands of his followers. And it's the case that even though these people have almost certain mental health disorders or neurological conditions, people believe them. Part of the problem, I think, is that most of us are not trained to interpret mental health issues. Right. You know, when I was in the interview with the RCMP involving a person who probably had schizophrenia, it took me probably an hour or so to figure out what was going on. I wasn't, sociology, religious studies person didn't have training in mental health issues. So these individuals confuse the grandiosity and the certainty of these people's visions to being spiritual insight. And they devote their lives to them because doing so they get extreme meaning for who they are and what their purpose in life is. It's dangerous.
Yes, you've given many examples of that. Absolutely. And I have to ask you, with the current political climate and what's going on with, here in America, do you believe that our former president is a cult leader?
Well, I'm not the first person to say that he's almost certainly a malignant narcissist. Now, narcissists have these sense of grandiosity and self-importance, believe that people should devote themselves to him at any cost. They lack empathy, and so on. Malignant narcissists have an additional dangerous trait, which is they go after critics and opponents. So some narcissists, when criticized, emotionally collapse. They feel like this world they've built up has just been shattered. Malignant narcissists get even. And if you listen to Trump's threats that on the first day of his presidency, he'll initiate targeted attacks against members of the Department of Justice and lawyers and political officials who were opposed to him. That almost certainly is a sign of malignant narcissism. Now, to the extent that the MAGA people follow him, whether he sees himself as a cult leader, he certainly has a cult following of individuals. And keep in mind that a lot of people, a lot of his followers, may have felt, threatened by the dramatic changes that are going on in American society, economic, population shifts, the increasing power of women, and so on. And a lot of people, especially a lot of white males, are really threatened by the changes. And Trump, I remember my first experience was seeing Guru Maharaj, who was an absurd leader, worshiping absurd. Trump's an absurd representative for these people's grievances. He claims to be a billionaire. He's got a large evangelical following. The number of evangelical Christians are certainly opposed to him, but growing followers amongst Hispanic evangelicals and so on. And he does cultivate those images, and he's even used messianic images about himself and his mission to bolster his pseudo-religious claims. So I don't have any problem people calling him a cult leader. A lot of cult leaders have much more direct control over their leaders than he does, much more hands-on manipulations. But one of the developments in the study of cults is the expansion of the concepts to look more at the social psychology of group of deviant group formations, and so that's why some people in the cult world um, are looking at MAGA in terms of a cult issue. One of the leaders in an interpretation of cult, Steve Hassan, wrote a book called The Cult of Trump. He'd been a follower of Moon, a narcissist, so he'd seen narcissism firsthand and personal. Um, and so with the rise of Trump, and with a number of mental health personnel calling him a narcissist, it was an easy transition from the cult of Moon to the cult of Trump. Now, one of the big questions for me is going to be what happens if Trump doesn't get reelected. And remember I talked about traumatic coerced attachment? A lot of these people are deeply attached to Trump, despite everything. And if he fails in this mission, the mental health fallout is going to be terrible. What he's claiming is there'll be civil unrest, riots, and it very well could be. But also there's going to be a tremendous set of emotional issues with people whose guru failed them and who start to see the failure for themselves. So good luck.
I haven't really grasped that until you just said that. And you're right. That will be very interesting and very sad.
We need to build a wall between Canada and the U.S. to keep you guys out.
I know.
From running up here.
So I haven't thought about it.
Yeah, when Trump got elected, I got some inquiries about people saying, how can I move to Canada? And it's not that easy, but some people then wanted to leave. And so we're going to have to see what happens. And, he almost got martyred. And that would have been a whole tragedy, aside from the tragedy of killing a political figure, just the emotional conflicts that would have caused to members. This growing awareness of cult-like behavior in politics, for many of us, we've seen it for a long time. It's just that under the Trump influence, it's really come to the fore now. And that's one of the changes I've seen in the study of these groups. Another change is a growing respect for apostate or former members' accounts. I talked earlier about how I experienced the complete dismissal. Well, now with the internet and so many stories and podcasts with former members telling their convincing stories and are able to back up their stories with accounts from other members, scholars can't ignore their accounts any longer. There's just too many of them. Moreover, another big shift that I remember when it happened was involvement of realizing that second generation people had a different set of experiences from first generation. That is to say, parents joined, they had kids who were born into the group who had no choice and who had no experience with the outside world. So initially in the anti-cult world, there was talking about apostates and damage to those members. And finally, the children born in the 70s and 80s grew up to be adults. And some of them started saying, our experience is different. We didn't decide to join. And when we leave, we're entering a world we've never really experienced. There was a former Children of God member, Julia McNeil, who was going to anti-cult conferences saying, you're not listening to us. So that's been a shift. And now there's an older demographic. The cults of the 70s are now the old people of the second decade of the 21st century. and when I first started, almost all the literature was about 20-year-olds joining. And now I'm getting, I got this person contacted me yesterday about this person's probably in his 30s. His mother, I don't know, in her 60s, 70s, got remarried, and holds, he said, every kind of alternative odd belief you can imagine. Flat Earth, anti-vaxxing, MAGA, whatnot. And so now, instead of the parents in the 70s worried about their 20-year-old kids, you've got 40 and 50-year-old kids worrying about their 70 and 80-year-old parents joining these groups. And of course, older people are real targets. They've got money, and the money's got to go someplace. And if they're following a high demand group, a cult, money's going to get left to the cult rather to the family. So, and of course, there's been a rise. We've already seen it, that anti-medical cults. A lot of these groups have anti-medical, alternative medical histories, but we really saw the harm they can do with the anti-vaccination movements and during the COVID period. We're also seeing, and we saw this for a long time, but probably we're starting to pay more attention to interethnic and intergroup violence. So these are violence inside particular religious groups. You think back to the peace efforts that Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin was carrying on toward Palestinians in the early 1990s. He got assassinated by an ultra-Orthodox Jewish fanatic. Shinzo Abe, former Prime Minister of Japan, got assassinated in 2022 by a deeply disgruntled son of a Unification Church member. She donated, I think in American dollars, I think about $700,000 to the Unification Church cause, and he said it ruined his life. It made him impoverished. It prevented him from going on to higher education, hurt the care of his disabled brother. And so the assassination against Abe was a political act of protest against Abe's support of the Unification Church when he was prime minister. So we're becoming aware again of intergroup violence and interethnic violence. I mean, Gandhi was killed by a religious fanatic. And then, of course, the social media that of the impact that's going to have. And you probably know that far better than I do. These suicide cults and there was a cult just busted that I think was centered out of New York, where I was getting people to commit acts of violence, random acts of violence against New Yorkers, self-harm cults and so on. But in the future, we're going to see some really odd cultic developments. We're going to see artificial intelligence, AI cults. Look, AI can go through, I don't know, thousands of documents spouting religious theologies in minutes, seconds. I don't know how fast they can do it. So AI can accumulate and bring together hundreds of thousands of years of religious wisdom. It's not going to be hard to imagine that some of these AI constructed intelligences are going to be venerated as religious figures. It's already happened in Japanese Buddhist temple. As robots become more lifelike in their appearance and manifestations, it's going to happen. I mean, it's already happening. Another big issue is the role of religious freedom in the context of other human rights issues. We hear a lot about the underground. It's not even so much underground. Some of it is the right-wing political networkings that are going on between and amongst the followers of right-wing political figures. So Trump and Orban and Kim Jong-un and support for Putin and so on. At the same time, and overlapping with these politically right-wing subversions are pushes uh, about attacks against the modern world, against secularism. And one of the ways to attack secularism is to say that the world needs a restoration of religious values. Consequently, there are all these right-wing religious groups, anti-modernist, anti-secularist, usually misogynist groups trying to put forward the primacy of the freedom of religion as the central dominating human rights concern. And that's just not, it's dangerous. Now, human rights has to involve the protection of individuals, protection of children's rights, protection of labor, protection of privacy,
Yes.
and the protection of not believing or changing one's beliefs and freedom of expression. All those kind of issues can get or do get challenged by these right-wing religious groups, and it's dangerous.
It is.
Um, I hope what we're going to see in the future is more uh, interconnections between uh, people who have backgrounds in sociology and religious studies, psychology, and, and psychiatry. Often, I've noticed that people in these disciplines talk about similar issues, but across one another. There's not as much sharing of information as there should be, in part because our training is very narrowly focused. And also, it's impossible to keep up with everything right now. It's impossible. And so, between people trying to learn, say, the discipline of psychiatry and to keep up on cults, it's just a nightmare. So, a lot's going on. We're going to be seeing interesting and I think dangerous unfoldings of ideological groups and harmful behaviors that are going to continue. And a podcast like yours does its bit to try to inform people and give people caution. One of the lessons I've learned, however, is that people can be involved in these groups for years, and leave and come out. And with help, um, often help by listening to other people's stories, uh, develop important lives for the rest of the time that they have. So even if people are deeply involved, they can get behind it. I mean, unfortunately, they're given an odd gift, which is they understand manipulation and authoritarianism and abuse far better than most of us. And if they can take that knowledge and reconstruct their lives, what they can contribute to the modern world now is really important.
That is very true, and that's a really good message. And I do think it is, it's so important. What you've shared today, what you have always put forward is very important work. And I think it, especially right now with, we just are the Wild West when it comes to the internet in the United States. And, with the mining of data that Facebook did, the tests that they were doing, psychological tests that they were doing back in the 2010s, it was just, it's been amazing. We don't even have a fraction of the knowledge that we should about what has been going on behind the scenes.
And Erica, a big concern I have is that a lot of the old guard, for people like me, I'm in my early 70s, we're going to check out fairly soon. And I don't know, I'm concerned about the scholarship of some of the younger generation because it's so online. And these groups, many of them have woken up to the fact they have to control their self-image. So they put out information that avoids the really serious issues about abuse that some of these groups were reckless about publishing when I first started studying these groups. Moreover, with concerns that institutions have about storage space, concerns that storage have about money to maintain collections, I really worry about the fate of my collection. I mean, I'm trying to find funding sources that would support the continuing development of the collection. We've got about I think it's about 38,000 individual files that are already labeled and set up, and we probably have we've 10 thousands of more files that have to be made. That's time consuming, it's labor intensive, there are issues about space. University right now doesn't have the money. Moreover, the interest now is with collections is digitalization. Well, you can't digitize a lot of this stuff for copyright reasons. It's also too much. So the big fear, there's been some articles in British newspapers and also in Canadian newspapers that archaeologists cannot find long-term storage space for all the things they're finding in their archaeological digs. So in Britain, construction goes on. They build a road. They come across an old Roman dwelling, or even something from the medieval period. Archaeologists are getting so much material that they're having to store the material in their offices privately. And then when they die, maybe their kids inherit them. The kids don't know what to do with it. So all this stuff gets thrown out. It's a real crisis about preserving the material, this very unusual historical period. People think, well, it's all on the internet. It isn't.
Right.
And the internet now is so jammed up, it takes forever to go trying to find some material in a systematic manner. So this historical period is rich and complicated and consequential and informative and disturbing, and a lot of the history is getting lost.
That's frightening.
Yeah.
Actually, because how do you learn if you don't have that information? That's really frightful. Is there a place that people could go to donate? Are you doing, where could people find you to support your work?
Well, I think you'd have to contact me by email.
Okay.
I can't make any promises at this point. And the material, the university owns a lot of material now. My concern is that I want to get the university to properly develop it more than it has already. And then there's new material coming in, all the time. And that I'd like to see that material get saved and processed and whatnot. But we have to do it. I started off studying sectarian groups in the 1650s. And there was one book dealer in London, George Thomason, who every time a book or pamphlet came into his shop, he put a date on it, set one aside. And the Thomason collection became the foundation for research into this extraordinary period of British history in the 1650s. And before that, of course, I'd studied ancient Buddhist and Indian philosophy and also early Gnosticism. History matters. It's a window into how people in different eras and different cultures try to make sense out of their worlds. We're going to lose all these efforts by these new religions, as harmful as some of them are. We're going to lose all that information. It's a real tragedy. So on that note, I got nothing else. I'm going to go.
Well, you've said so much, and I really wish you the best of luck in trying to get a safe place for this, and trying to get other people to follow in your footsteps, because it is important. I think now more than ever, this is it's very, very important. And so thank you for your work, and thank you for spending the afternoon with me.
My pleasure. Farewell.
Thank you.
As they say on Star Trek.
Live long and prosper.
Yep. So
Take
long.
care. Thank you. Bye-bye. All right. Thank you so much, everybody. That was a fascinating conversation. I am going to have to go listen to that again, and I'm sure I'll be picking out much, much more from that. I want to thank all of you for being here and supporting the show and making sure that other people know about it. I appreciate all of the props on Twitter as of late. You guys are awesome. And you can go to expandingfrontiersresearch.org to check out our work and to become a Patreon. Thanks, you guys. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your week. Well, actually, who am I kidding? I'll be here tomorrow at 1:30 interviewing Steve Erickson, who is an advocate here an activist here in Utah. He did a lot of work with regard to Dugway Proving Ground, so you won't want to miss that. Take care. I'll see you guys tomorrow.